All right. Let's move on to the next story, and that is, of course, another kind of interesting dilemma or situation kind of being brought up, and that is, of course, the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls are kind of dealing with their whole mess. It seems like Lonzo Ball's still hurt, and things like that. But a story that just came out from Zach LaVine, and he really got pissed at Billy Donovan, was the game against the Orlando Magic. And the article goes on to say, or I should say, Zach LaVine's quote says this: LaVine didn't agree with the decision, which Donovan anticipated. Zach LaVine on sitting out the final 343 of tonight's loss to Orlando. That's Billy's decision. He's got to live with it. Do I agree with it? No. I think I'm going to go out there and still be me, even if I go out there and miss some shots, but that's his decision. He has to stand on it. And this is going to be a very interesting, I would say, situation brewing in the Windy City. I'm very curious to see if Zach LaVine eventually gets traded or what happens with him, because he had the opportunity to leave last year, decided not to, decided to sign that extension. And I'll leave it up to you guys. The ball's in your guys' court. Like, what do you make of this whole Zach LaVine kind of left out at the end of it? And I'll have the Zach LaVine stats up as well to show you guys what's been going on with him. It seems like the stats have been falling a little bit for him.
Well, first and foremost, shout out the Bothell boy. I don't want to slander him too much because that's my dog. Like, got to represent for a local kid. But I feel you're right, Bernie. Like, this has been brewing for a while, and Billy Donovan didn't do himself any favors by benching Zach. I know Zach was playing terrible, but he is right. They just extended him, paid him $200+ million. Like, is it really the right move to be sitting your star in a November game, like against the Magic? I know you want to win this game, but I know he was without Paul. That's a tough loss. That's a really bad loss. But it just furthers the gap that Zach has between the front office and between each other. I feel like Zach should have been out there. I know he was stinking it up, and I know they went on a run, but you can't bench someone that you just gave $200 million to. It just isn't. It doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
Oh, and especially too, like, I think a lot of this Bulls situation is kind of like a I don't know how to phrase this, but I think it was they put a Band-Aid over a situation that was going to kind of get to this point eventually anyway, I thought, right? Because we talked a lot about Zach LaVine. I almost said Ben Simmons again. Zach LaVine a couple of years ago before DeRozan even came to Chicago, right? And it was really looking like Zach LaVine was going to get his way out of Chicago. He was done with it. They signed DeMar DeRozan. Zach LaVine goes to the Olympics. He plays the best defense I've ever seen him play. That was where he started to change my opinion of him as a player and what he could be, like long-term, as far as like a 2 or a 3 on like an actual championship team. And I really legitimately think he still has that in him. I did not believe that before 2 years ago. So I don't really understand putting him on the bench. Even if you're going to lose, you don't bench your star player. Because even then, Rosen might be your star right now, but DeRozan's 33 or 34. He's on I think he only has a year after this on his extension, right? Because I think he only signed 3 years with Chicago. You have to think a little bit more long-term than this. Like, you can't think one game, we're going to bench Zach LaVine to get this win against Orlando. And they were so far behind, and I know DeMar DeRozan had a great game. He almost brought him back to win that one. But it's just, you can't do that to your guys. You can't do it. It's the same. I mean, like, I'll give credit to Steve Kerr in Golden State. And Bernie, we talked about this last weekend. I was telling you a lot of problems I had with the Warriors as far as how they were handling things and, wanting their cake and eating it too, as far as, having these old guys who aren't playing well, but also trying to get these young dudes out on the court or not in some cases, like Kuminga and Moody. But Steve Kerr has done really well. I'll give him all the credit in the world. Those are his dudes. These are his star guys who have, brought him. And I know it's not the same with Chicago. They have no success with these guys, whereas the Warriors have 4 championships. But you can't bench a guy who's not on a cold streak and hope that their confidence is going to get better. You can't do that. That's literally not how it works. That's the opposite of that. And realistically, you also have to be realistic about like what is going on with your team. Lonzo Ball is hurt. You weren't planning that. You don't really have a legit traditional point guard for this team. You don't. So, man, a lot of this is on Billy Donovan. You know, we were talking about this in our group chat the other night. The coaching is just horrendous for this team. I don't really understand what they do on offense most nights. And last season was the same thing. The difference was that DeMar DeRozan was so freakishly good for a huge stretch of the season last year that he literally was carrying them to wins. And I think it really set a false expectation of what this team even could be for the people on the team and fans around the league. Because people saw them have a good record, beating a lot of teams, but they were legitimately only beating bad teams. Or only beating bad teams all of last season. And you know, same thing is true now, except now they can't even beat the Magic without Paolo on their team for that game. So this is tough. I will tell you, I legitimately do not think Zach LaVine is going to be on this team after the trade deadline this year. I don't see it. Just don't see it because they're not going to get any better. Not going to get any better because Lonzo's not coming back. I haven't heard anything that suggests he's close to coming back.
Probably be second half of the season for him.
Even then, does he fix enough of the issues with this team's offense to
No way.
make Zach LaVine happen? He doesn't.
It would be way too late. Yeah.
He doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, we'll see what happens. Again, my only concern is really just like the stats declining just a little bit. Not because I think it's like a decline in skill for Zach LaVine. I just think it is I think when the stats are going down, like everything across the board, I think star players start to get frustrated. They start to think like, is this really the right situation for me? And I think, we've seen that, not to point fingers, but we've seen that before with Zach LaVine, right? In Minnesota after getting drafted by them. Like he did not want to be there. And I think that eventually led him to get traded to Chicago. Does the same thing happen again? Does he force a trade out of there? And does he decide to go somewhere else? Does he decide to go to a contending team? Can a contending team compete for him?
Lakers.
The Lakers have enough for him? You think you get?
The way I see it, they kind of got to blow it up
together again.
Well, the way I see it is they need to blow it up and tank because the Magic own their top pick if it's not a top 4 pick. So they need Russ, pretty much the tank commander, to lead them to that top 4 pick. Which also reminds me of how bad that Wendell Carter Vooch trade was.
I mean, we talk about it all the time, Brad. That is to me easily the worst trade in the last 10 years. There is nothing as bad as that trade because literally
the Rudy Gobert trade is creeping up, but we got to see how it ends.
That trade is definitely right there too. But just on paper, I mean, that trade will easily be worse if those picks end up being like, if they end up getting Wembanyama or some craziness out of that. Sure, that'll take the cake. But on paper now, I find it really hard to believe this one's going to get outdone. Vooch for Hans Wagner, Wendell Carter Jr., and then whatever that pick is going to be. And that pick is pretty good. So that pick looks worse and worse by the day because Vooch at this point, I mean, I don't know. I don't even understand like what they
Wendell's
thought Vooch
better.
was going to be.
That's ridiculous.
Wendell Carter's better.
Yeah.
It's so ugly.
Yeah,
it's ugly.
One thing I'll say, shout out to the Orlando Magic coaching staff, man. I think they've really transformed Wendell Carter Jr.
And Bol.
Ball.
And Wagner too. I mean, they're making these, and Paulo, for that matter. I think Paulo is a lot more aggressive than he's ever been. I think since I've seen him play, like even Duke or even O'Day here in Seattle. I mean, they've changed them. They call it the mentality monsters. Like they changed the mentality of these players, and they just become. They believe, like when a coach believes in you, man. The way that I think that what's the Orlando Magic's coach name?
Jamal Mosley.
The way that Jamal Mosley believes in those guys, I mean, you can clearly see like it's working in Orlando. But again, going back to the Chicago thing, I mean, this is one of those things where last year a lot of people thought that they were a top 4, top 3 seed. I had my doubts about that because I just think that as much as I love Zach LaVine, as much as I love Lonzo Ball, the concern to me was always going to be like the Vucevic and really, not to kind of, beat on a dead horse for Zach LaVine, but like if Zach LaVine is not happy, you don't get the best version of Zach LaVine. Like you get a person who's frustrated, and you can clearly see that with the way the stats have been going and the way that taking him out because Billy Donovan for whatever reason wants to take him out. I'm not sure why. I think that's just the icing on the cake, and I think if one more thing happens like that again this year, he's gone, and I think that he's moving on to a different team. And I'm not sure what team that'll be. Brad says the Lakers. I'm not sure if that's.
They don't even have the cap space, but I wish.
Yeah, but maybe it's another team out there. I'm not sure who else.
In the Knicks, I'll tell you what, the Knicks have said they were interested in LaVine before. Yeah, I mean, no, they're going to do something. So somebody will go get LaVine too, because he's not as valuable as like an AD or a Karl Anthony Towns. He's not as valuable. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about SGA right now because we're going to bring him up later. Again, of course, I have to bring up SGA. But he's not even as valuable as him at this point. So there's going to be somebody who convinces they want LaVine because he's what, 27 still, 28. I mean, he's still right in his prime. Yeah, he's right in his prime. Go get him. His extension isn't that crazy either, considering what it's going to be in a year or two. So I would say, yeah, somebody should go get him. But my last thing with this team, and I think Bernie, you really hit the nail on the head with Jamal Mosley and the Magic, right? They're a great example. Like one of the things that has been very illuminating for me this season, right? And I've noticed it. I think it's stuck out a lot more than other seasons, is coaches putting their players in the best positions for the players themselves, right? Knowing what's best for their players and, actually thinking about not just one single game, not just about what's working in the moment, but also, empowering these guys to play the best basketball they can, right?
Yeah.
And creating this atmosphere of, we all care about each other no matter if you're playing well or not. We're going to figure it out tomorrow, right? I think like a coach like Billy Donovan is a very poor example of that. Same thing with Tibbs. Same thing with Doc Rivers. There's a handful of these guys. There's a handful of these guys in the NBA. And if you watch them on a night in, night out basis, and then you compare and contrast it with guys like Jamal Mosley, JB Bickerstaff, Taylor Jenkins, all these dudes, if you compare it with that, it is crazy the difference. You can see how much their players respond to what these coaches are saying just by the pure fact they feel their coach has their best interest in mind. Right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing, going back not too deep into the Brooklyn thing, but that's basically what KD was saying. Whether or not it's fair or not in his situation isn't the point, but that is what he was trying to point out about Steve Nash and Jacques Vaughn, right? He was saying, like, we want to be in the best position to succeed as a team. Like, if you're not coaching us to the best of your ability and doing everything you can to put us in a position where we're not going to look like idiots, what are you here for as a coach, right? And that's a super fair criticism. That is a very fair criticism of Steve Nash. We don't need to go into the fact he picked Steve Nash, but it's fair because Steve Nash was not doing that. And seemingly Jacques Vaughn is going to do that. You already have seen Ben Simmons respond well, but Billy Donovan has never done that. We've seen how his players have responded to him in the past. People have always felt this way about Billy Donovan. And even then, Billy Donovan has never really succeeded in the NBA. So I don't really get why you're sticking with guys like him at this point when there's just better coaches out there. There's just better coaches. I would actually be much, much sooner getting rid of Billy Donovan than trading Zach LaVine. I just don't know if I think it might be too late for that, with LaVine in particular.
Yeah. I mean, they got to decide quickly, like what's the next step for them, because
DeRozan, like we talked about, not much longer.
Yeah. I mean, that might be another situation where they might have to trade DeRozan. I don't know. They need to figure something out because it's just obviously not working in Chicago at the current moment.
And one other thing for this team is how bad they've drafted. And I know that might be a little unfair because Io has been very, very good for them. I still have some stock in Patrick Williams, but I mean, if you look at they've had some high picks in these drafts for the last 10 years now, right? And that's amounted to Kobe White, who played 4 minutes in that Magic loss. You have Io, who was super solid in that game, and then you have Patrick Williams, who had 12 points in that game, right? None of their other picks are there. Wendell Carter is off playing his best basketball somewhere else, like we talked about. So front office is also responsible because they have done no favors to these guys.
Yeah, I mean, the concern is that right now the Chicago Bulls are 6-10 for a team that, again, like we talked about last year, they were a team that people were like, okay, this could be a top 2, top 3 NBA team, and now they are here the year after, and they are currently 6-10. And if something doesn't change very soon, I feel like in the next 10 games, if they don't continue a streak or like they start winning, then I really do think that's going to be L after L. I mean, they're on a 4-game losing streak right now.
I mean, yeah, their roster construction is just pretty bad. I don't see it getting better, and their schedule is only harder. They play Boston on Monday, right?
Ooh, yes,
And then,
yes, please.
Yeah, you guys.
They're going to get cooked in that game.
Yeah, then they play the Bucks.
I will tell you now, that's a 20-point loss income on that one.
Yeah, guaranteed. Might be another stinker from Zach too, to be honest.
Could have been a Celtic.
I mean, who knows, man? He still might be. Never know.
I like the way our team is cooking right now.
I agree. I wouldn't trade for him if I was the Celtics.
Yeah,
but yeah, man, that's one of the ugliest situations because that pick hangs over them just as much as the Lakers situation. They can't really just tank it out, And I mean, they could. It's risky because they still might not even get the pick anyway. So I don't like that.
I mean,
situation.
I feel like that's why they would need to cut it as soon as possible, right? To get that top 4 pick. Because otherwise, then tanking isn't going to do you much. But if you're tanking hard, you're probably guaranteed at least 4 if they start now.
Yeah.
Is there anything that this team could do to you to fix their situation? Do you guys think?
I don't think so. I think they're desperately in need of a playmaker because even when they had a different coach, you're definitely right about firing Billy Donovan before trading Zach.
Terrible coach.
Yeah, because even when they had Lonzo, who's, a great playmaker, he wasn't being used as a point guard. He was being used as like a wing who would space the floor and play defense, a 3-and-D wing. So going back to that draft situation, I really wish they would have drafted Tyrese Halliburton. I remember saying it on the show, Bernie, when we did the draft for that year. I remember saying the Bulls needed a playmaker, and I said, take Tyrese Halliburton. Now look at it.
They'd be in such a different spot.
Yeah.
Or even if they had just moved off of Kobe White before his value was 0, I mean, that dude lived on the bench since they drafted him. Like, it's crazy, dude. No planning.
Yeah. But people, let us know in the comment section down below, what do you guys make of not only the Chicago Bulls, but this story of Zach LaVine, currently frustrated, says he needs to play a guy like him down the stretch. Let us know in the comment section down below, does Zach LaVine get traded, or does he stick it out in Chicago and Billy Donovan gets fired? Let us know how this whole Bull situation goes down in the comment section down below. And let's move on to our next segment, which is going to be the cap or no cap.